supposed to be a little further away from where people live. Now, when we think about this business of tanning skins, and we'll go ahead and talk about it because we're talking about the breeze and we're talking about Joppa, this was a profession that most Jews would not choose. Most Jews would not be involved in it because of the contact with dead animals. It rendered you unclean. And so it prohibited you from doing things that Jews wanted to do. And certainly they wanted to be clean, to be able to participate in certain things. But this profession would keep you from being able to do that. And so many Jews would choose a different profession other than this because of that. We'll talk more about Simon when we get down there, but those are just a few details concerning him. Now this disciple is named Tabitha, and by interpretation in the Greek, that name becomes Dorcas. Both of these names refer to the gazelle, and most suggest that they have the idea of a little gazelle, or a little female deer. The idea being one of grace and beauty. Here is an animal that's known for grace and beauty. And so the parents of Dorcas gave her this name because they wanted her to be characterized by grace and by beauty. And certainly she lived up to that name that was given to her. Later, when Peter's going to raise her from the dead, he's going to say, Tabitha, arise. Literally, he's going to say, little gazelle, get up. It's time for you to wake up. It's time for you to come back to life. Now the parallel is to a situation in Mark chapter 5 where Jesus raises a little girl from the dead. And Jesus says, little girl, arise. Peter changes just one letter and it becomes little gazelle, arise. But it is interesting when you read through this account, and you read through the account in Mark chapter 5, that Peter is following the pattern that Jesus set forth. Peter was with Christ on at least 3 occasions where someone was raised from the dead. And Peter was a good student. Peter was watching what the Lord did on those occasions, and Peter is going to follow that pattern in the raising of this little girl, that's what her name means, this little gazelle from the dead. Now, it is interesting on this occasion, as we move down through the context, that you'll find that when Peter goes in this upper room to raise her from the dead, that Peter's going to send everyone out. Peter's going to be there alone with her. Now, there's a reason for that. The pattern was what Jesus did in the raising of that little girl, and Jesus sent everyone out. Now, Jesus sent everyone out because Jesus wanted this to be hush-hush. Jesus wanted this to be kept quiet. Remember, Jesus is trying to keep the crowds from continuing to grow and build around Him because of the pressure that goes with that. And so Jesus is wanting to perform this miracle because it needs to be performed, but Jesus does not want to draw more attention to Himself than is already on Him because it prohibits Him from being able to go freely, and it causes individuals, of course, causes the desire to silence Him, to stop Him, to grow more and more. Peter sends everyone out on this occasion, no doubt following that pattern. It isn't so much that Peter did not want people to know what was occurring or what was taking place. But the point that's interesting here is, you think about modern-day faith healers, modern-day fakers, if you will. They want an audience. They want as big of an audience as they possibly can get because they are wanting to deceive, and in order to be able to deceive, they want a lot of people there. They want the attention to be on them. They relish that kind of attention being upon them. But here, Peter doesn't do that. Peter, in many ways, is very different than those individuals. Not only can he really raise someone from the dead, as we see on this occasion, and they cannot, he's not trying to draw attention to himself, which of course they are. He is not seeking financial means or money from this. He gets nothing for it. Of course, they are after those kinds of things. They would argue that the person being raised or being helped has to have faith. Of course, we know that Dorcas, while she was alive, had great faith, but she's dead. Whatever faith she has at this point is a dead faith, And yet Peter's going to be able to raise her from the dead. In spite of that, that's not going to prohibit him or hinder him in any way. Dorcas, this woman, was full of good works and alms deeds which she did. She was full of good works. Now, we're all full of something. It's just a matter of what. Some of us are full of foolishness. Some of us are full of ignorance. Some of us are full of stubbornness. Whatever it is, we're all full of something. There is space within us, and that space is naturally going to be filled up with something. It's just a matter of what it's going to be filled up with. Whether we're going to allow that filling to take place by accident, we're going to let it take place by neglect, whether we're just going to soak up our environment and whatever we have around us, or whether or not we're going to purposefully fill our lives with certain things. Whether or not we're going to choose to fill our lives with faith, and we're going to choose to fill our lives with patience, and we're going to choose to fill our lives with love and other attributes. Whether we're going to choose to have the fruit of the Spirit, and whether we're going to choose to have the Christian graces within us. We either pick those things and decide, I don't have room for this in my life because I want this in my life, and so we pick and choose and we pack in as much as we possibly can. Now, let me use this illustration. Maybe it'll help you with this. Sometimes we take trips, and maybe some of you have unlimited space when you travel, and so you can just take everything. You can take the kitchen sink if you want to. We don't have that kind of space. We have a large vehicle, but with as many kids and as many of us as there are, we don't have unlimited space, and so we have to decide what do we absolutely have to have. And certain things don't get to go, and a lot of those things are my things, but that's okay. I can get by on a little, but because we pack fans and we pack pillows and we pack other things that I'm not sure we can't get when we get there, but we want our own, and so we pack those kind of things. Well, there's limited space, there's limited room, and we have to decide what do we want, what are we making room for. In like manner, we as Christians are on a journey, we're traveling. And we can't take everything with us, and so we've got to decide, what do I need? What do I have to have? You remember Jesus talked about, you have your purse, and you have your staff, and you have certain things that you travel with, because you can't take everything. You have to pick and choose. We can't take everything with us, and so we've got to pick and choose because we're strangers, we're pilgrims, we're on a journey. We have to choose what we're going to lug about. The Bible says laying aside every weight. There's some things we don't take because they just weigh us down. They just wear us out. They're not needed for the journey. We don't get too attached to this world. We don't get too attached to the things of this world because they're not necessary. The journey that we're on. This world's not our home, and so we're not trying to take everything with us. Now think about this as well, and we'll talk about a little bit more of this in just a second. This is the second woman, disciple, that is named in the book of Acts up to this point. Does anybody recall who the first one was? Ananias and Sapphira. And so Sapphira is the first one named, Dorcas is the second one named. Could there have been a greater contrast between those two women? Sapphira fell into one category, Dorcas fell into the other. Very different women, very different stories, very different endings to their lives. You see, the Bible records those that go to heaven, but the Bible also records those that don't. The Bible records those that are selfish, covetous. The Bible also records those that are charitable and giving. And Dorcas fell into that category. And her life is recorded for. Do you realize that there are only 7 verses that are dedicated to her life? 7 verses. Everything about Dorcas, from the time she was born to the time that she died and came back and then eventually went away again, it's recorded in 7 verses. Not a long history. But most of us know the story of Dorcas. There are Dorcas societies all over the world. There are people who have followed her example for thousands of years. She left an impression. She left a mark, even though the Bible does not dedicate very many verses to covering her life. But she was full of good works and alms deeds, which she did. And this expression, which she did, literally means which she continually did. It's the imperfect tense. And it's the idea that she just continually did these things. This was just who she was. This wasn't something she got up one day and said, today I'm going to do something good for somebody. We sometimes do that. And then we roll off another year and we don't do anything else. That's not what this is saying about her. It's saying every day when she got up, this is who she was. This is what she did. Every day she got up and she said, what good can I do? What can I do for somebody else? Who needs something? How can I meet that need? That's the way she approached every day. It's the way that we ought to approach every day. She was full of good works. She was full of alms deeds, which she kept on doing, which she continually did. And it came to pass in verse 37, in those days, that she was sick and died. And when they had washed, they laid her in an upper chamber. She was sick and died. You know, good people get sick and die too. It isn't just bad people that get sick. It isn't just bad people that die. Good people get sick. Good people die. Good people get cancer, not just bad people. It'd be pretty easy to tell the good from the bad if it was the case that only bad people got sick. Only bad things happen to bad people. That's kind of what people, at least for a time in the Bible, thought. Something bad happened to you, you must have sinned. You must have done something wrong. Remember Job? Job, something horrible has happened to you. In fact, horrible things just keep on happening to you, and so you must be the greatest sinner of all time. For this to happen to you, you must be the absolute worst sinner there's ever been. That wasn't the case, but that was their interpretation. Aren't you thankful that we live in the day and age that we do? That we have more insight to that than other people had? What if you've got cancer today? Aren't you thankful that people aren't looking at you and saying, what are you hiding? What is it that you've done that we don't know about? What is it that caused God to do this to you? If you had lived 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago, people very likely would have thought that. They might not have called it cancer. They might not have known what it was. They just knew your health was declining, and they would have attributed that to something you've done wrong, some sin in your life. We know better today, and we're blessed to be able to live in the day and age that we do, that we don't assume that. Notice it says that she was sick and died, in whom when they had washed, they laid her in an upper chamber. Washing the body was a part of preparing the body for burial. And we talked about in this day and age that we're reading about here, and especially in the land that we're reading about, the climate that we're reading about, burial had to take place quickly. If a person died in the morning, they were buried by evening. If they died in the evening, their body could be kept to the next morning, but that was the limits. That was the extent that you could stretch things out. We talked about how far Peter was. Some suggest it was 9 miles. Others suggest it was 12 miles. Probably took somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 hours for the men to go and get Peter, and then for Peter, if he left instantly and came back, for him to get back. And so if she died in the morning, then Peter's got to come right away, or she's going to be buried by the time he gets there. If she died in the evening, then Peter has overnight travel to make in order to get there, in order to even have the opportunity to raise her from the dead. And we don't know that's what they were after. We don't know that that's what they thought Peter would do. They knew Peter had worked great miracles. But generally speaking, once a person had died, a great deal of hope was lost at that point. You remember even Lazarus. Jesus was the one we're talking about there. Jesus is alive. And yet Martha says, if you had only been here. If you had only been here when our brother was sick, we know you could have prevented that sickness from producing death, but he's already gone. It's already happened. And Jesus explains to her, I'm the resurrection and the life. Death's not going to prohibit me from doing this. It isn't any harder to raise the dead than it is to heal the sick. It takes the same power to do both. You have to have, of course, the power of God. Jesus had that. Peter has that. Peter's going to be able to do this. And great miracle this is. They had laid her in an upper chamber. Most suggest that they had done this because they were awaiting Peter's arrival. And so they had moved her to an upper chamber to keep her there in order for Peter to have a little bit more time to get there, in order for others to gather around her. It says, and forasmuch as Lydia was nigh to Joppa, and the disciples had heard that Peter was there, they sent unto him 2 men, desiring him that he would not delay to come to them. Here's the urgency. They send 2 men. Why do you send 2 men? You ever thought about that? Often in the Bible we have 2 men being sent. Why do you send 2? Can one not do it? Sure. But you have a backup, don't you? Not a bad idea to have. 2 men traveling together, what if something happens? What if one man gets sick? What if one man is detained for some reason? It's just important that this message get through. We'll send 2. Not taking any chances with this. 2 men. We'll make sure the message gets there. Jesus talked about the wisdom of sending 2 men, right? The Bible talks about they help one another. They encourage one another. Someone has said, as 2 weeks or so ago in the bulletin, if you want to travel fast, you travel alone. If you want to travel far, you travel together. Well, this is 9 to 12 miles. Maybe it's not that far. There certainly is urgency to what they're doing. But they can encourage one another. They can help one another. And so 2 men are sent. We don't know the name of these 2 men, do we? The Bible doesn't tell us. Just simply tell us what they did. In this context, we're going to read about people. 2 of them are going to be named. These 2 are unnamed. But they each do what they can do. I don't know what kind of preaching ability these 2 men had. I don't know whether they could lead singing or not. I don't know whether or not they could serve as elders or deacons or serve in some other capacity. I don't know any of these things about these men, but I know they could carry a message. They could get to Peter. They were trustworthy. They could be depended upon to do that, and they were willing to do that. They were willing to go as quickly as they could to deliver this message. I don't know what you can do. I'm pretty confident, though, you can do this. You can do what these 2 men did. They couldn't raise Dorcas from the dead. Peter could do that, but somebody had to go get Peter. And they were fellow helpers to the truth in the sense that they were willing to go over there and get him so that he could come and do what he could do. The point that I'm making is, in the body of Christ, there's something that all of us can do. It may just be run and get somebody else. Okay? Run and get somebody else. Maybe that person doesn't even know what's happening. Maybe that person doesn't even know what's going on. You can be the one that can go and tell them. And then they can come and make a difference. But do what you can do. Then we're going to read about Dorcas. She is named. We do know more about her. I don't know what Dorcas' talents or abilities were. I don't know if she could conduct a ladies' day or not. I don't know if she could teach ladies in a public type of setting. I don't know that. I don't know what her abilities were. I don't know whether she was a good cook or not. But I do know she could sew. And evidently do so very well. And she was determined, I can do this. This is needed. This serves a purpose. I'll use my talents, whatever they are. I'll use the means that I have, and I will do this. I will make a difference in the area where I can. She's willing to do that. Simon the tanner, another one that we read about in this context. Don't know very much about Simon the tanner. I don't know what Simon's abilities were. The Bible doesn't tell me. Could he preach? Could he lead? I don't know. But I know he had a house. And I know Peter needed a place to stay. And I know Simon was more than willing for Peter to come stay in his house. Peter might not have wanted to stay at a house where tanning was the business. But Simon says, I've got a house, I've got room, you're welcome to come stay with me. Simon did what he could do. The point is, there is something that every one of us can do for Christ. Not all the same, we all can do something if we're just willing. You see, the problem in most areas in the church, it's a matter of willingness. Willingness is the greatest problem that we face. Getting people who are willing to do what they can do. Not getting people to do something they're not able to do or capable of doing or do something above their abilities. That's not the problem. We've got people who have plenty of ability. It's just getting people who are willing. We have plenty of people that can teach, don't we? It's just getting people who are willing to teach.
But we are supposed to, if we know all this, if we can't do it, then we should make sure someone who can knows about it.
Absolutely, and we can encourage and we can help them to do it. We can do something. There's not, the Bible doesn't talk about any man who had no talents. The lowest the Bible goes is a one-talent man. But everybody has at least one. Some have two, some have five, but nobody has less than one. So nobody can say, there's just absolutely nothing I can do for God. That's not true. Some of us may have to search a little bit more than others to find out what we can do, but we can do something. There's some kind of contribution we can make if we're willing to make it, if we're willing to do it. And these individuals, these two men, Dorcas, Simon the tanner, they all were willing to do what they could do for the Lord. They used their talents, abilities, opportunities, resources, whatever they were, they used them for the Lord. In Mark chapter 14 and verse 8, we read of a woman, and Jesus said of her, she hath done what she could. If that can be said of us on the day of judgment, we're going to be okay. If we will just do what we're capable of doing, we're going to be okay on the judgment day. God doesn't expect us to do anything above what we're capable of doing. He just expects us to do what we can do, what we're capable of doing. He doesn't demand of us something that we cannot do. He only demands of us what we can do. Now, no one knows that better than God. No one knows that second to God better than you do. No one else knows what your abilities are like you do. But you ultimately have to pass that test, that you have done what you could do, what you're capable of doing. And if you do that, then you're going to be okay. Think about as well, as we move through this, desiring him that he would not delay to come to them. Then Peter arose and went with them. And when he was come, they brought him into the upper chamber. And all the widows stood by him, weeping, and showing the coats and the garments which Dorcas made, while she was with them. The widows are there. The widows are standing by Peter, and they're weeping. It's interesting, isn't it, in the Bible, the times when we find women being the ones that are most represented there? You think about the tomb of Jesus. Who went on that resurrection morning? Who was there? Women. We see women at the foot of the cross too, don't we? Women. Women are devoted. Women are faithful. You look around this morning in this auditorium, you'll see more women than you do men. A number of reasons for that, but women tend to be very devoted and very faithful. And here, certainly that's the case, these widows. Evidently, these were widows, these were individuals that Dorcas had done something for. You know who usually will show up at your funeral? People who knew you, people who were benefited, blessed in some way by you. Those are usually people who will show up at your funeral. Usually it's not people that you never met. Usually it's not people that you had no interaction with, that you did nothing with. It's people that you did something for them, and they appreciated that, and they never forgot it. It stayed with them through life. It's interesting, isn't it, when you're at a funeral home to see who comes through that line. Sometimes it's people that you didn't expect. Sometimes it's people that you haven't seen for 30 years. And here they are. But 30 years ago, you made an impression on them when you worked with them. You made an impression on them when they were going through something like that, and you were there for them. And here they are. They're there for you. Here are people that Dorcas had helped. They never forgot that. And when Dorcas dies, they're there. They're right. And think about the fact that this scenario is even different than the modern scenario, where sometimes we have 2 or 3 days to get there. We have 2 or 3 days to get ready and whatever. They have to learn about the death very quickly in a day and age to which they don't have a news line like we do, or other advantages that we do. They have to get there very quickly if they're going to be there and be around. But these are individuals who perhaps had been a part of caring for her if her sickness was extended in any way. They're gathered there, these widows, and they're weeping. They're people that she's helped. Now, widows in the first century were individuals that were in a very desperate position. They did not have a male to care for them. They did not have a provider for them. The Bible emphasizes the care of the widows and the care of the orphans as being a part of pure religion. And James chapter 1 and verse 27. And Dorcas took that to heart. Dorcas was trying to meet their needs, trying to help them. Nobody else out there for them. She took them on as a project, as something that she could make a difference in. They're standing by him and they're weeping. And they're showing the coats and the garments which Dorcas made. Peter, she made this for me. You see this beautiful coat? Dorcas made this. I'm still wearing it. It's still keeping me warm. Demonstrating to Peter the difference that she had made within their lives. What are people going to be showing after you're gone? What are they going to be showing? Are they going to have anything to show? Or are they going to say, look at this stack of cards. During my sickness, during my illness, they sent me a card every week. Not a week went by, they didn't send me a card. You see this over here? They cross-stitched this for me. You see this here? They made this for me. Well, with Dorcas, there were plenty of things left behind that she had done. But Peter put them all forth and kneeled down and prayed, and turning him to the body said, Tabitha, arise. And she opened her eyes, and when she saw Peter, she sat up. Think about this. Here was a woman that these disciples wanted back. And they wanted her back, evidently to such an extent that they enlisted the help of Peter. When you're gone, are people going to want you back? Are they going to say of you, oh, they went on to a better place? Good for them. Are they going to say, how are we ever going to fill that void? How are we ever going to get this done? You know, if they were here, they would be right in the middle of this. They'd be doing this. You know, we didn't have to worry about this for 30 years because they just took care of this. It was done. Didn't have to worry about it. Now they're gone. Dorcas was that type of person. They missed her. They wanted her back. Peter's going to pray. He's going to tell her to arise. She's going to open her eyes. And she's going to see Peter. She knew Peter. She loved Peter. Here she gets to see him again. She sat up, and he gave her his hand and lifted her up. How many people had she lifted up in life? Now Peter lifts her up. And when he had called the saints and widows, presented her alive. He called them. They loved her. She loved them. He presented her alive. Can you imagine that? Here's one they loved, died. They're weeping, they're sorrowful. And literally sorrow's turned into joy. Here she is, brought back to life. Verse 42, and it was known throughout all Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. You see, the purpose of miracles was to confirm the messenger. It had a greater purpose than merely the healing of someone. The greater purpose was to create faith. And people believed. They knew she was dead. Now they know that she's alive. There's no denying that. And great faith comes from that. I heard a story of one of these faith healers who for years, preachers have challenged faith healers, if you really have this power, let's go to the cemetery. You raise somebody from the dead. And they, of course, tell stories of raising people from the dead halfway around the world, but they don't go to the cemetery to raise anybody from the dead. But I heard this story of a faith healer who claimed he could do that, and so he said there's somebody down at the funeral home in a casket, and I'm going to go down and I'm going to raise them from the dead. And so they went down there with him and looked in the casket. Fellow sure did look dead, but just had to make sure. So pulled out a pistol, pointed it at his head, and said, if he's dead, not going to matter if I shoot him, is it? And suddenly he came alive and got out of that box and went on his way. Well, the point is this. That power has passed, hasn't it? It's passed. There's going to come the moment in the twinkling of an eye when, in fact, I was talking to Brother Sparks about that this last week. We were standing on the 7th floor of the hospital looking out that window on those open fields. I said, can you imagine when the Lord comes back? You know, there are cemeteries where we know that there are cemeteries. And those graves are going to open. What a sight that will be if we're here to see that. If we're in one of them, it's going to be a sight too, coming out of them. But if we're still alive and remain, can you imagine that sight? And can you imagine all the places where we don't even know that there are graves? Big fields where the Indians were buried, where this person or that person was buried, and there's no tombstone there anymore. Can you imagine all of those? What a sight that'll be. Can you imagine all the people who have been cremated, buried at sea, some other way? All those people coming forth. Amazing sight that will be. The Lord's going to put them all back together again. Not too difficult for Him. Verse 43, it came to pass that he tarried many days in Joppa with one Simon, a tanner. Great success came from the raising of Dorcas from the dead. Dorcas got a foretaste of heaven. What if, I want to end with this thought, what if you could go to heaven, or at least go to the pleasant place of waiting for 5 minutes and come back? Would it make a change in you? Would you say, I've got to be careful, I've got to get back to that place. I don't want to miss that place. It's the most wonderful place I've ever been. It's far beyond any description I've ever read. I've got to go to that place. I think it would change us if we could spend just 5 minutes there. I think there would be a burning desire within us to get back to that place. No doubt there was for Dorcas. Thank you very much for your attention this morning.